Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Farron and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. Fear the Earthborn. The message repeated on every frequency is a chilling welcome to a world with not a single survivor. Those words echoed in Quasar's mind as his boots clanged against the metal ramp, his handheld device displaying a transcription of the endlessly looping message. He descended with Iniar and Vixa flanking him, the three of them tasked with investigating the source of the broadcast. Though the Federation had granted them this world as a new colony, Quasar's species refused to accept the gift without first understanding why every structure lay in crumbling ruins, and why only a ghostly warning remained. The warm wind hit Quasar's face like a furnace blast, carrying with it grains of sand that stung his green skin and made it feel as though it might blister under the relentless heat. His black-dotted skin, evolved for the cool ocean breezes of his homeworld, rebelled against this alien environment with every step he took onto the scorching surface. As Aquasarian explorers, they were creatures of the shore and sea, their silver hair more fit to catch ocean mist, and their big blue eyes adapted to pierce through coastal fog rather than squint against desert glare. Quasar's people were beach dwellers by nature, more comfortable with sand between their webbed toes than beneath the burning soles of their boots. Yet here they were, prepared to trek across endless ruins to reach the mysterious transmission source, driven by questions that only the heart of this desolate world could answer. Suddenly, Vixa snatched the tracking device from Quasar's hands without so much as a glance in his direction, her blue eyes fixed on the readings as she announced,
1 hour on foot through the ruins if we want to find the source.
Her tone was that of someone who had stopped asking for permission long ago. His sharp, fish-eating teeth gleaming in the harsh sunlight as he tried to diffuse the tension that seemed to follow them everywhere now. The laughter came out forced and uncomfortable, like everything else between the three of them these days. Quasar sighed deeply and shook his head in defeat, watching his official lifetime mate stride ahead without waiting for his response. Despite their formal bond, the years had worn them down from passionate lovers to mere friends, and lately, even that friendship seemed to be slipping away like sand through his webbed fingers. He couldn't remember the last time she had looked at him with anything other than irritation or indifference. Iniar gestured toward Vixa's retreating form and said, "Come on, let's follow her." His voice took on a wistful tone as he added, "Remember when there were 4 of us doing this, exploring mysterious signals and always coming back as heroes with stories to tell?" His silver hair caught the desert wind as he gazed after Vixa, lost in memories of better times. Quasar simply nodded, the unspoken name of Iniar's departed mate hanging heavy in the air between them. To speak of her choice to abandon their endless adventure for a quiet life back home, felt like opening old wounds. Instead, he turned his attention to the path Vixa was already navigating. The ruins stretched before them, a maze of collapsed stone and twisted metal that told the story of a civilization's violent end. With each step over crumbling concrete and through the skeletal remains of towering structures, the silence of this endless world seemed to amplify the growing distance between the three of them. Vixa moved with ease, her green skin glistening as she took point, rarely looking back to see if her companions kept pace. Quasar found himself constantly scrambling to match her agility, his webbed feet slipping on loose stones, while Iniar huffed behind him, their seashore-adapted lungs struggling with the fine dust that swirled in the air with every gust of wind. The tracker in Vixa's hand beeped steadily as she scaled a particularly tall pile of rubble, lifting the device toward the scorching sky.
"We're close,"
she called down, her voice containing some excitement despite the growing distance between them.
"The signal's getting stronger. We should find the source of this 'Fear the Earthborn' message within minutes."
Despite the constant heat and their exhaustion, the trio had unconsciously drawn closer together as they progressed deeper into the ruins. Some unspoken fear seemed to bind them now, a shared awareness that whatever had destroyed this world might still be lurking in the shadows of its remains. Quasar noticed how Inyar stayed within arm's reach, and how Vixa's confident strides had become more cautious. "I think this will be our last mission," Quasar said in a low voice as they picked their way through a field of scattered metal fragments. The words came out heavier than he'd intended, weighted with resignation. "She'll leave me as soon as we're done with this." Inyar glanced at him sideways, his blue eyes reflecting concern.
Don't say that. You two are a good team. Always have been. Whatever's happening between you, it'll work out.
Quasar was about to reply when Vixa suddenly stopped dead in her tracks, her silver hair whipping around as she turned to wait for them. The tracker in her hand was beeping rapidly now, almost frantically. As they caught up to her position, she pointed toward a structure that rose from the ruins like a dark tooth against the pale sky.
"There,"
she said.
"the pyramid. That's where the message is coming from."
The structure was unlike anything they'd seen in the ruins so far, perfectly intact, its black surface seeming to absorb all the desert light as strange symbols covered its walls.
"Are you guys ready to face whatever's in there?"
Vixa asked, turning to look at both of them. Her blue eyes were serious, almost grave, as if she understood that crossing this threshold would change everything. Quasar felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him, remembering countless moments like this from their earlier adventures, when the three of them, and their fourth, had stood on the brink of discovery. Without thinking, he leaned dangerously close to Vixa's ear and whispered, "Always." Vixa pulled back slightly, her eyes widening with surprise at the sudden display of affection. She looked at him strangely, as if seeing something she'd forgotten was there. Suddenly, she shook her head as if to clear it, the moment of connection passing like a shadow across her features.
"Let's continue,"
she said, her voice the same usual businesslike tone as she turned back toward the pyramid. They approached the structure with careful steps, their boots crunching on the smaller debris that littered the ground around its base. The black walls rose higher than they had appeared from a distance, the strange symbols seeming to glow with greater intensity as they drew near. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with an energy that made the air on Quasar's arms stand on end. At the pyramid's base, they discovered an opening that made them all pause. It was a simple doorway, perfectly rectangular and completely unobstructed, standing open as if inviting them inside.
"That's odd,"
Inyar muttered.
"Usually we have to solve some alien puzzle or fight our way past guardians. This feels too easy."
Vixa nodded, her grip tightening on the tracker.
"I don't remember we ever found an open door. There's always something. A test, a trap, a challenge."
Quasar stared at the dark threshold, unease crawling up his spine. "Maybe whatever was guarding it is already dead," he suggested grimly. Despite their misgivings, they stepped through the doorway together. The interior was a single vast room that seemed to stretch much farther than the pyramid's exterior dimensions should have allowed. The walls were smooth and featureless, and at first glance, the space appeared completely empty, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. But as Quasar's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the doorway, he noticed something in the far corner that made his breath catch. "Wait," he said, raising a hand to stop the others. "It's not empty." In the shadowed corner sat two objects that seemed to dominate the otherwise vacant space. The first was a large rectangular box, its surface covered in intricate carvings that made it look like an elaborate coffin. Beside it on the ground lay something that was difficult to identify from this distance, but the general shape suggested the remains of a bipedal creature, possibly once a living being. Vixa raised her tracker, its beeping now so rapid it was almost a continuous tone. She pointed first at the coffin-like box, then at the remains on the floor.
"The signal,"
she said, her voice tight with excitement and fear.
"It's coming from there."
The three of them moved as one toward the corner, their bodies pressed close together as if drawing strength from proximity. Flashlights clicked on in unison, casting long beams of light that pushed back the shadows and revealed the grim tableau before them. The bones were scattered across the stone floor in a rough outline that suggested the creature had collapsed where it died. Time had bleached them white, and there was little they could tell about the cause of death. Iniar knelt beside the remains, his blue eyes studying the arrangement.
"Several centuries have passed since this one died,"
he said quietly, his voice echoing in the vast space.
"Maybe longer."
Vixa bent down and carefully lifted the skull, turning it in her hands as she examined its alien shape and the empty eye sockets that had once held two eyes.
"Bipedal, definitely. The bone structure suggests intelligence."
She raised her wrist scanner, its soft green light playing across the ancient remains. After a moment, it beeped.
"Species designation, Zira. According to the database, they're classified as extinct."
But neither Iniar nor Vixa were looking at the scanner anymore. Something in Quasar's expression had caught their attention. His blue eyes had gone wide, fixed on something among the scattered dust and debris. Without a word, he reached down and retrieved a small circular disc, no larger than his palm.
"I think I found the source of the message,"
he whispered. The disc seemed to glow with its own inner light, and as he held it up, a faint holographic display flickered to life above its surface. Vixa quickly ran her scanner over the device, and it immediately began beeping frantically.
"Confirmed,"
she breathed.
"This is it. This is the source of the signal."
All three of them leaned in closer as Quasar held the disc steady, their heads nearly touching as they stared at the mysterious holographic display that had been broadcasting its warning across this planet for centuries. Quasar gently blew the dust off the small device, watching as particles danced in the beam of his flashlight.
"This looks like a play button,"
he said, his finger already moving toward a raised symbol on the surface before pressing it gently. The trio's eyes went wide as a figure materialized in the holographic display. Azira, standing as tall as Quasar's hand and speaking in a language that their universal translators immediately began processing. The synthetic voice that emerged was calm, but carried a certain urgency.
"If you are seeing this message, it means I am dead, and so is everyone else of my kind,"
the hologram said, his words echoing in the vast chamber. The Zira was unlike anything they had imagined from the bleached bones scattered around them. His skin was a deep purple, almost violet in the holographic light, and its yellow eyes gleamed with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through time itself. Most striking were the long black hairs and the fangs that protruded from his mouth. Not the sharp teeth of a predator, but something more elegant, almost ceremonial in their placement. Quasar paused the recording, his thumb finding the control almost instinctively. The three of them exchanged glances, each processing what they had just witnessed.
"I would never have imagined they looked like that from the bones alone,"
Vixa said. Quasar's thumb found the play button again, and the purple-skinned figure resumed speaking with that same calm urgency that seemed to reach across centuries.
"This is the story of how a single human became the downfall of my entire species,"
the Zira said, his yellow eyes seeming to look directly at each of them in turn.
"My name was Kelthara, and I was among the last of my kind to witness the end of everything we had built."
The hologram gestured with clawed hands, his long black hair shifting as he moved.
"Our civilization existed on what the Federation calls a death world. To say we lived in peace before the human arrived would be a lie. Our world was never peaceful, but there was order in the chaos, a structure that held us together despite our violent nature. Our society functioned because the old held absolute control over the young, maintaining strict rules that had governed us since the dawn of intelligence on our planet. It was harsh, it was rigid, but it worked."
The three Yaquizarians exchanged glances, each recognizing the familiar pattern of elder control that had plagued countless civilizations throughout the galaxy. They turned their attention back to the hologram, sensing that this tale was only beginning.
"The day this fragile order took its first hit," Kelthara continued, "a human in an escape pod fell from the sky into our world. We rescued him, though rescued might be too generous a term. Our relationship with humanity was strained at best. We saw them as weak, soft creatures from a world that did not deserve the title of a death world. We saw them as people who couldn't understand the harshness required to survive. We had no good reason to release him, but neither did we have cause to execute him. So he became our prisoner."
The Zira's expression grew contemplative, almost wistful.
"One of the most powerful elders of that generation, Griniaru, took pity on his human prisoner. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps some misguided sense of honor, but he brought the human into his clan. He offered the same treatment he would give any young Zira male under his protection: food, shelter, and the same restrictions. Most importantly, he made it clear that his daughters were off-limits to anything but the eye."
Kelthara paused, and when he resumed, his voice carried the weight of prophecy fulfilled.
"The human's name was Michel. He was young, perhaps 25 in human years, with brown hair and eyes that our females found mysterious. At first, he kept to himself, learning our language, our customs, trying to understand the complex hierarchy that governed every aspect of our lives. But isolation breeds curiosity, and curiosity breeds connection."
The hologram's form flickered slightly, as if the ancient device was straining to maintain the projection, but Kelthara's voice remained steady.
"Griniaru's oldest daughter was named Yalith. She was beautiful by our standards. Deep violet skin like starlight, eyes that glowed like twin suns, and a spirit that chafed against the restrictions placed upon her. She was also intelligent, more so than many of the males in our society cared to admit. When she began bringing Michel books from her father's library, claiming it was to help him understand our culture, no one questioned it. When she started spending hours teaching him our history, our philosophy, our poetry, it seemed like an act of cultural education."
The Zira's yellow eyes seemed to dim with memory.
"But books became conversations, and conversations became stolen moments. They would meet in the garden courtyards late at night, when the household slept. She would show him the constellations from our sky, and he would tell her about the stars he had seen in his travels. The logs of their communication were preserved in his translator. They showed how slowly, inevitably, friendship became something deeper."
Kelthara's voice took on a storyteller's rhythm, as if he had told this tale many times before.
"For 3 years they managed to keep their relationship secret. 3 years of clandestine meetings, of messages passed through trusted servants, of stolen kisses in shadowed alcoves. Yalith taught Michel to move like a Zira, to understand the subtle politics of our society. Michel showed her star charts and spoke of planets where beings chose their own mates, where love was not dictated by age and hierarchy."
The hologram's form solidified, as if the device was drawing power from the intensity of the story.
"At first they were careful, perhaps too careful, but their caution bred confidence, and confidence bred carelessness. On the night of the harvest festival, when the elders were deep in their ceremonial wine and the younger generation celebrated in the outer courtyards, Michel and Yalith believed they were safe. They met in Griniaru's private chambers, thinking the old man would be occupied with his fellow elders until dawn."
Kelthara's expression grew dark.
"But Griniaru had been suspicious for weeks. Small things. The way his daughter smiled when she thought no one was looking. The way the human looked at her. The way servants would glance between them with knowing looks. He returned to his chambers early, perhaps testing his suspicions, perhaps simply tired from the festivities. What he found there changed everything.
The Zira's voice dropped to almost a whisper, yet somehow carried more weight than before.
He found his daughter and the human entwined in each other's arms, planning an escape that would take them far from our world. The sound of Grinyaru's roar of rage was heard by all the guests. Within minutes, guards had surrounded them. Within hours, the news had spread across the planet.
The hologram's hands clenched into fists.
The discovery sent shockwaves through our entire civilization. Here was proof that the old ways were failing, that the young could not be trusted, that even the most powerful elder could not control his own household. But it also revealed the hypocrisy of our system. Why should the young be denied their choices? The planet divided into factions overnight.
Kelthara's voice began to rise with remembered passion.
The Council of Elders met in emergency session. They had to make an example, they said. The human had violated the most sacred law of hospitality, seducing the daughter of his protector. The sentence was death, to be carried out at dawn 3 days hence. Yalith was to be married immediately to an elder of her father's choosing, a punishment that would remove her from society until the elder died.
The Zira's yellow eyes seemed to glow with inner fire.
But Michelle and Yalith had one final act of defiance left in them. On the morning of the execution, when the guards came to collect the human, they found both prisoners dead in their cell. They had obtained poison somehow, perhaps from a sympathetic servant, perhaps from Yalith's knowledge of her father's gardens. They lay in each other's arms, having chosen death together over separation.
The hologram's voice cracked slightly.
That single act of protest became the spark that ignited the fire that would consume our world. The forbidden lovers had become martyrs, and martyrs have a way of inspiring others to action.
Quasar pressed pause again, his blue eyes wide with disbelief. The 3 Aquasarians stood in stunned silence for a moment before Vixa spoke.
A planet destroyed because of forbidden love?
She said, her voice carrying a note of incredulity.
That seems absurd.
Iniar nodded, his silver hair reflecting the light from their flashlights.
Love stories don't usually end with planetary destruction. There has to be more to it.
Quasar looked down at the device in his hands, then back at his companions.
Let's find out what really happened,
he said, pressing play once more. Kelthara's image resumed, and his expression had grown darker, more haunted.
What followed was our version of what the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand once was to humanity. A single event that triggered a war no one truly wanted, but everyone felt compelled to fight.
The Zira began to pace within the confines of the holographic projection.
The youth of our planet had been simmering with resentment for generations. They saw Michelle and Yalith as symbols of everything wrong with our society, the arbitrary nature of power, the crushing of individual will, the denial of basic freedoms. Within weeks of their deaths, protests erupted in every major city. The young demanded representation, demanded the right to choose their own mates, demanded an end to the gerontocracy that had ruled our world for millennia.
Kelthara's voice took on the tone of a chronicler of disasters.
The elders, terrified of losing their power, responded with violence. They controlled the planetary defense systems, the military, the infrastructure. They believed they could crush this rebellion as they had crushed all previous challenges to their authority, but they underestimated the depth of rage that had been building in the hearts of the young.
The hologram's form seemed to expand, as if the ancient device was straining to contain the magnitude of the story.
The war lasted 7 years. 7 years of brother fighting brother, of children turning against parents, of a civilization tearing itself apart. The young had numbers and passion. The old had weapons and experience. Cities burned, populations fled, and still the fighting continued.
Kelthara's voice grew hollow with remembered horror.
In the end, the young one, but at such a cost that victory became meaningless. The planetary defense systems had been turned against our own cities. The infrastructure lay in ruins. The knowledge of generations had been lost in the fires of war. Of a population that had once numbered in the billions, perhaps 100,000 survived, scattered across a world that could no longer support them.
The Zira's image flickered, as if even the hologram was exhausted by the weight of the tale.
I survived in the bunkers with the other remnants of my people. We ate our stored food, drank our recycled water, and waited for the world above to heal. But it never did. The ecosystem was too damaged, the society too fractured. One by one, we died. From starvation, from disease, from despair.
Kelthara's yellow eyes blazed with the fury that had survived centuries.
I hated that human, not humanity as a whole. I came to understand that they were simply another species trying to survive in a hostile galaxy. But that one human, Michel, who had the audacity to love where he should not have loved, who had the selfishness to drag an entire civilization into his personal tragedy. Even as I lay dying, I blamed those two for everything we had lost.
The hologram's voice became bitter, almost venomous.
When I finally left the bunkers, when the food ran out and I knew I would die above ground as easily as below, I had one final mission. I would find the bodies of those two martyrs and destroy them out of spite. I would rob the revolution of its symbols, even if there was no one left to care.
Kelthara's form began to fade slightly, as if the device was finally beginning to fail.
But the revolutionaries had been cleverer than I gave them credit for. They had built this pyramid as a trap, designed to capture anyone who entered seeking to defile the tomb of their martyrs. The moment I stepped inside, the door sealed behind me. I was trapped with the very symbols of destruction I had come to eliminate.
The Zira's voice dropped to a quiet whisper.
I died here, in front of their coffin, surrounded by the technology that had once made my people great. My last act was to create this warning, this record of how a single human's love affair became the catalyst for the destruction of an entire civilization. Fear the Earthborn, because they bring chaos wherever they go, not always through violence, but through their very nature.
The hologram flickered one final time, then faded completely, leaving the three Equazarians alone in the vast chamber with nothing but the echo of Kelthara's words and the mysterious coffin that had started it all. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft beeping of Vix's scanner and the distant sound of wind through the pyramid's entrance. The three of them stood motionless, processing the magnitude of what they had just heard.
The trap,
Inyar said finally, his voice barely above a whisper.
do you think it's still active?
Quasar looked around the chamber, noting the ancient dust, the silence, the lack of any obvious threat. Probably disabled by time, he said, though uncertainty colored his voice. Everything else here is centuries old. Vixa approached the coffin slowly, her scanner held out before her.
But now we know what to expect inside,
She said, her voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and apprehension.
The bodies of the two lovers who destroyed a civilization by accident.
The three of them stood in front of the coffin, wondering if they truly wanted to open the tomb that had claimed so many lives, and whether the love story that had ended worlds was finally ready to end. The silence stretched between them as they stared at the beautiful stone, each lost in their own thoughts about the tragic tale they had just heard. The elaborate carvings on its surface seemed to tell their own story, symbols of love and defiance intertwined with images of war and destruction. "We should inspect it," Quasar said, his voice cutting through the contemplative quiet. "After everything we've heard, We owe it to them to see what their sacrifice actually meant. Vixa nodded slowly, her scanner still beeping softly in her hand.
The scanner says it's safe.
Iniar approached the coffin from the other side, running his webbed fingers along the edge where the lid met the base.
The question is whether we have the right to disturb them. They've been at peace here for so long.
Peace? Quasar shook his head. They died as prisoners. They became unwilling symbols of revolution. I don't think they've known peace at all. Maybe it's time someone honored their memory properly. The three of them exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between them. They had come this far, learned this much about this planet. They couldn't leave without seeing the end of the story.
Together, then,
Vixa said, positioning herself at one end of the heavy stone lid. Opening the coffin proved to be a monumental task. Even with all three of them working in coordination, the ancient mechanism resisted their efforts. When the lid finally shifted a bit with a grinding sound of stone against stone, they had to pause to catch their breath. The green skin of all three was slicked with perspiration, and their silver hair clung to their faces from the exertion. "One more push," Quasar said, and together they managed to slide the massive lid aside just enough to reveal the interior. What they found inside took their breath away for entirely different reasons. The two figures lay exactly as Kelthara had described, fingers intertwined, faces peaceful in eternal sleep. The crystallization technology had preserved them perfectly, down to the smallest detail. Michelle's brown hair was vivid, and Yalith's violet skin seemed to glow with the brightness of eternal youth. They wore simple clothes, suggesting they had died as prisoners rather than as the famous martyrs they would become. But there was something else, something that made the scene both beautiful and heartbreaking. Without a word, Vixa reached out and took Quasar's hand, her fingers intertwining with his in an unconscious echo of the lovers before them. The gesture was simple, natural, and spoke volumes about everything that had been left unspoken between them during their difficult years together. Quasar looked down at their joined hands, then gently reached out with his free hand to pet Vixa's silver hair, the same affectionate gesture he had made countless times during their better days. She leaned into his touch slightly, and for the first time in months, the tension between them seemed to vanish. Iniar watched this tender moment and simply smiled, his sharp teeth glinting in the flashlight beams.
The warning was useless,
Vixa said finally, her voice soft but certain.
This planet has healed. The ecosystem has recovered from whatever damage the war caused. It's ready to sustain life again. Our life.
She released Quasar's hand, but stayed close to him as she began to move toward the pyramid's exit. For the first time in months, she wasn't simply taking the lead to get away from Quasar. She was moving forward with purpose, and the others were choosing to follow. "We should return and report to our people," Quasar agreed, falling into step beside her. "This world can be our new home." As they walked toward the entrance together, Iniar's voice carried a note of resolution that had been missing for years. "I've decided something," he said, causing both his companions to turn toward him. "I'm done with this life of adventure. I want to go home, make amends with—" He paused, unable to say the name of his estranged mate. "I want to try to rebuild what I walked away from." Quasar laughed, the sound echoing warmly in the vast chamber. "It took you long enough to figure that out. She's been waiting for you, you know. She never stopped hoping you'd follow her." "I know," Iniar said quietly. As they stepped back into the scorching desert air, the three of them paused to look back at the mysterious pyramid one final time. The wind had shifted, and the oppressive heat seemed less overwhelming than it had when they'd first arrived. "You know what's funny?" Quasar said, shielding his eyes against the glare as he looked up at the alien sky. "We came here expecting to fear the Earthborn, to discover some terrible warning about humanity's capacity for destruction." Vixa nodded, understanding already dawning in her blue eyes.
But instead, we found a tragic love story.
Quasar took Vixa's hand again, this time deliberately and without a hint of hesitation. Maybe we don't have to fear the Earthborn at all. Maybe we should thank him.
Thank him?
Vixa asked as she squeezed his hand in return. That human, Michelle, Quasar explained as they began their journey back through the ruins toward their ship. Even across species and time, he might just have helped us save our own love story. The three Equisarians laughed, discussing the possibility of befriending the humanity that was still alive somewhere, and sharing with them the tale of a human who once died for love on a distant world. As they returned to their ship, they realized that this planet would indeed become a new home for their species. But more importantly, they had rediscovered something far more valuable than any new colony: the understanding that some things are worth fighting for, worth dying for, and worth living for, even when the inspiration comes from a long-deceased Earthborn.